Welcome to Discover the Difference, a podcast brought to you by C3. I'm your host, Jamie Reed, along with Gabe Earl. Today we have a retired Navy SEAL veteran in Diego Ugalde. He calls himself a psychedelic pathfinder. And if you're curious what that is, well, so were we. He was led to psychedelics, otherwise known as shrooms, in an effort to pursue treating PTSD that he suffered while being a Navy SEAL. He used shrooms to treat ego, trauma, and other things that had happened in his life in the military. And through the course of that journey, he himself elevated up and decided that he could help other military veterans treat the same kind of symptoms. He's out there making a huge impact every day in the lives of our veterans by this process, which, as he describes it, can take 20 years of therapy and compress it into one single setting with psychedelic impact. So enjoy this episode of Discover the Difference with Diego Ugalde. Talking beforehand, you both have intimate relationship with Fairfield. Your father being in the Army, growing up around Army, right?
Air Force, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Don't insult him.
Yeah. My bad.
It's okay.
But growing up around the military environment, did you always know that you wanted to be a Navy SEAL, or how did that come about?
I did awfully in school, which I didn't realize.
That's the first time we've heard this of a Navy SEAL on our podcast. There's a theme here.
Yeah. There's many themes. Yeah, there's many things that tie us close together, which we don't really find out about, I think, a lot of times until after the military entirely. But one of the things that I think ties us together as a community is I didn't necessarily have all the love and support that I wanted growing up as a kid. So I didn't understand that, and what it did was it manifested in just like my brain shutting down in school. So, yeah.
Just to dive into that a little bit more, Did you realize that in real time, or is this something that
not
is an
at all
epiphany later in your life, looking back?
40 years later.
40?
Yeah. 40 years later, I was like, oh, that's where all that was from.
When you say your brain shut down, is that like a nervous system thing, or?
It was a trauma response mechanism. Yeah. Which, I used to be a paramedic, so the trauma runs the whole gamut, everything from gunshot wounds to car crashes to even being afraid of being hit. All of that and everything in between. That's all trauma. So we're not in our culture taught how to respond in a healthy, resilient way towards trauma. We're taught to, I say we, just because that's how I was taught, and this what I hear the normal narrative as being is just avoiding, just shoving it under the carpet. It doesn't matter, it doesn't exist, whatever it is.
Suck it up, be a man, all of that stuff. Yeah, terrible things that, anyway, there's a reason why men have a disproportionate rate of suicide than women. But anyway, that's one of them. So I didn't understand it at the time, but I learned how to build and develop this muscle of just like literally checking out when things weren't going well. And so for me, sitting in the class and learning about algebra was just, it was too much. It was just overload for myself. So I just shut down. Is that like a survival mechanism for you?
In other words, yeah, totally. I learned how to shut down at an early age just because I just didn't want to feel, I didn't want to experience, I didn't want to acknowledge what was kind of going on around me. Now, to be clear, I didn't live in this huge toxic, I wasn't being like radically physically abused or anything like that, but it was the worst I knew. And so that all the mind needs is just a little bit of kindling, and you can get as big a fire as you want. Mm. You know what I mean? My dad loved me. My brother loved me. My mom loved me. It was just different than I would have ever wanted. So it wasn't the worst thing.
How so?
What do you mean?
Like when you say different than what you wanted, what was it that you wouldn't have wanted, or what was it that you did want?
I would have liked for my mom to stay. That would have been cool.
Your parents separated?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
So that was part of the trauma.
That was part of it, yeah, for sure. Which
Do you feel responsible or something? Or?
I did at the time, and I did for good reason, because I think I might have been 4 years old or something like that, and we never kept our room clean. So they would tell us to clean it 2 or 3 times, and if we didn't do it that time, then they would go down and they put the kitchen timer on the.
That's the final warning.
Yeah. And then if the buzzer went off and we weren't done cleaning, out the belts would come, kind of thing. Normal way of growing up in the 70s and 80s, you know. But still, like, it was just something that created a heightened level of, you know, all kinds of things, awareness, fear, anxiety, and all that stuff. But anyway, again, at that age, it's just normal. It's just a function of life.
But you're connecting, like, not cleaning your room as a responsibility of your parents getting divorced.
I knew the timer was really getting close, and so what I did was, one of the things I had to do is get my clothes folded and put it away. But in order to meet the timer, I picked up my clothes and I threw them in the closet. And my mom saw that, and she lost her shit. She started screaming, and she literally left the house, and she didn't come back for days. And so as a kid, I was like, I know they say it's not my fault, but that was my fault.
Yeah.
It wasn't, but I didn't, as a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
I can't do the math on that. It's just, I had an action, there was a reaction. She left, my mom left because of me, kind of thing.
Yeah. When did you do the math on that? And how?
I'm not entirely sure.
That's something that unfolded over time.
Oh,
maybe?
over time. Yeah. So at any rate, those are types of things. You're asking me what I would have preferred. I would have preferred, it doesn't matter what I would have preferred. It happened as it did,
Yeah.
and I'm grateful that it happened, because this whole thing set off a domino effect that lasted the entirety of my life and towards building me to where I've become. It is because of all of this that I am sitting in. You guys even want to talk to me at all? I wouldn't have become a SEAL if it wasn't for all this stuff. I wouldn't have start a business. I wouldn't have written a book. I wouldn't have done any of that stuff if I just had like this bubble of just like, hey, I get everything I want. Life is awesome.
Well, that would have been a different trauma.
Yeah, the trauma of not growing.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, in a lot of ways, it kind of doesn't matter what I prefer, and who cares anyways? Because I was 4 years old. Like, what does a 4-year-old know about what they really want?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with, you know what I mean? It just is, but it really doesn't matter. It just unfolded as it did, and this is kind of the result of all of that. So here we are.
Well, it's interesting because it kind of reminds me, you know, you talk about these traumas as kids, or you just, when you're a young kid, you don't really understand those connections. Like I was thinking about my father and telling me the story about when he was 7 and his mother blamed him for her breast cancer. And it was because she told him it was because he hit her breast.
Yeah.
And so, you know, obviously it's, you know, it's crazy, but as a 7-year-old, you take that in and
It's the truth.
you actually feel that that's
you plant
true.
that thing
Yeah.
and it grows roots.
Yeah.
Big ones.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand that, then it's, you know, that tree can grow as big as you want.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I mean. It's like the mind doesn't need much kindling. It just needs a little spark, and it'll as big a fire as you want. You got it.
Well, how are you able to have that insight going back to as a 4-year-old, like that was, you know, a trauma in your life that has had an effect, or how's that, you know, created a pattern in your life that you had to kind of work through or grow from?
The pattern that it created was that I put myself out into the world as like this totally jovial, happy, fun-loving dude, just in case anybody else's like radars picked up on that and were also, and that I could match up with people who were happy and fun-loving and all this stuff. And then what I didn't understand is that it was like a codependency thing. Like I needed the people in my life to respond that way, but because I was still growing on my own, I didn't know how to clean my room. I didn't know how to clean my environment. to make sure that those people who were there were not welcome in my life. I didn't know how to do that. So it's all twisted. It's not going to be clean. It's not going to be straight. It's not going to make sense because I didn't know what I was doing. But yeah, I created this persona that kind people would be attracted to so that I could connect with them. But I didn't know how to rid myself at the time of toxic relationships that I didn't want in my life. So it was just, I can even feel just the imbalance and this discombobulation and static and all this stuff, which makes sense that, my mind wasn't clean in school. You know what I mean? It was just all over the place. It was fear. It was mire. It was all this stuff that was there because I was just completely out of balance. So going back to your original question of how I decided or realized I wanted to be a SEAL, because I did so terribly in school, I used to get like in a lot of trouble for it. It wasn't like a little thing.
By your parents or by
my dad. And I used to just get like these spontaneous nosebleeds. I would just be sitting in class and all of a sudden it would just like you turning on a water spigot, just like bleeding. And so I would go to the school nurse's office. And every time I went to the school nurse's office, she was just the best person ever. And we would just talk all the time, and she could tell that there was, I wasn't being abused or anything like that, but she could tell that there was like this level of whatever anxiety or whatever it is that I had. So she turned into like my coach, and we would just talk all the time about certain things. And I would go to her every report card being, okay, here's the report card. How am I going to break this to my dad kind of thing? And one day I walked in and, my report card, I think I had maybe 2 F's, a couple of D's. I think I might have reached a C+ somewhere. And she's like, okay, we've had these conversations about how we're going to break this to your dad. Why don't we start working ahead of the issue and start to, do something productive?
Yeah,
so
turn the
it's
page.
like, yeah. And she's like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, you know what? I think I want to be a doctor. And she's like, bro. Yeah, you're like, dude, this is yeah. She's like, man, dude, you don't like school, and doctors go to school for like 10 years. You sure that's what you want to do? And I was like, well, I love helping people and all this. And she's like, well, do you know what a paramedic is? I'm like, no, what is that? And she's like, well, they're kind of like doctors, but instead of going to school for 10 years, they go to school for like 10 months. And they save people's lives. They get them out on the street, and if they're not, they take them and they drop them off at the hospital. It's super cool. And I was like, every word she said, I was just like, my eyes were getting bigger, my mouth was getting bigger. I'm like, that sounds like the coolest thing I've ever heard of. So then my life became, this whole pursuit of becoming a paramedic. So I even got like CPR certified before I was old enough to even get CPR certified. My favorite movie at the time was Pretty Woman, because Richard Gere was just so bloody rich. He could do anything in the world he wanted to do. So I'm like, how do I do this? I'm like, I'm going to own my own ambulance company. So I created, like, before I even knew what a business plan was, I was like, here's how I'm going to get my own ambulance company. I was doing ride-alongs and all this stuff. And I was happy because I knew all I had to do was just make it through high school and I was going to be good. And then over the summer, my best friend lived across the street from me, Gordon, and we would do like these blockbuster movie nights. And, we would just pretty much run out the video store by that time. We'd seen every movie we wanted to see. So we were kind of just waiting for new releases. And then the movie Navy SEALs was released, and we checked it out. And I'm watching this thing, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, this is the coolest thing ever. These guys are going after bad guys. They're driving fast cars. They're shooting guns. They're diving. They're jumping out of planes. What is this? And then about 15 or 20 minutes into the movie, I realized that they had a paramedic on their team, and I was like, that's it. This is it. This is my whole life. And so I fully immersed myself into the whole process of that. I was buying the hats and the shirts and the dive socks and all that stuff, and Nobody knew what I was doing in high school. Nobody knew about Navy SEALs really. But yeah, that was my whole thing, and that's kind of where it all started.
Can I ask? I want to ask one question, because you talked about how you created this persona of a jovial, happy person in order to attract other people like that to you and energy in your life. And there's a book that in the early chapters they said to change a habit or change habits effectively long term, you have to change your identity first. And so you have to create this like false image of yourself and work toward it with these habits to eventually become it. Did you consciously do that, or was that a subconscious?
Oh no, I didn't.
Because you could have just sat in it over here and gone a whole different direction, but you chose that you're going to move this direction to bring positive energy into your life.
It wasn't at that age. I shouldn't say that age. For my particular situation, I was completely unaware of all that. It was either cellular memory or my guides looking out for me saying, hey, this is the road you're going to want to take for you. Who knows? But it certainly at that age, it was not a deliberate decision to look like, here's how I'm going to shape my life. It was some kind of basic instinct response defense mechanism that is just, I could have responded in all kinds of other ways. It wasn't a deliberate, like I didn't sit there like, hey, well, I can either do this and attract goodness, or I can do this and attract bad. And that's not what happened. It was just.
Did you feel jovial and happy, or was it?
Oh yeah, totally. I was always, for most of my life, people would say that I was about the happiest person they'd met. And I felt like that a lot, many times. Even when I was in the hardest, darkest times of my suffering, I was always laughing. I was always smiling. And I remember when my parents got divorced, it was kind of during the opening wave of parents realizing that they didn't have like this death sentence together kind of thing. So all kinds of kids were getting divorced, so much so that they actually brought in a psychologist or someone to speak to our class. And she said something about smiling, what the effects that smiling can just have. And so I adopted that. And to this day, if I'm like completely checked out, I'm not even paying attention, I'll be like, I started as a little kid. It's like, if I'm going to smile as much as I can so that I can feel, of course it's all crap, but.
What an impression that person, like that's a moment, right? Where you decided.
Just psh.
So funny, because our old COO had listened to a recording that I had done of something, and she said, can I give you feedback? I was like, sure. She's like, it sounds like when you're speaking, you're not smiling. She's like, try to re-record it, and because it's just an audio of what we were doing. She's like, look in a mirror while you're recording and smile at yourself. And it changed the tone of my voice 100%. Just by that physical thing happening, Yeah. It's powerful.
It is, especially like what you're saying. If people can't see our faces or whatever, you can tell when somebody's smiling or laughing or happy or not. But
so you're 20, right, or 18, or when are you going to the SEALs?
Yeah, the moment you get off the couch from that movie.
Yeah.
Oh, that was junior year it was summer break, junior year into senior year. So I had a whole senior year to prep and all of that stuff. I went to the recruiters, and there was this. Now we're getting into kind of like the process, because it took me like 10 years to make it through SEAL training. But part of the reason why it took me 10 years to
only 10.
Yeah.
That's a long
road. Like, well, they told you to be a doctor. It's 10 years. So.
I never thought about that.
Well, be a SEAL in 10 years.
Well, it's funny because actually Mia noted it, that when Robert was on, he told us that he qualified at 28 and that he had to pass it then, because that's the last, if you pass that date, you can no longer qualify.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Was that a driving force for you too?
No, it just so happened to be that when I finally made it through, I was able to make it in at 29.
So what's that journey? Because most SEALs, it doesn't take them
10 years to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So when you go to the recruiter, one of the main things that they have to do is everybody who joins the military does this, is they take something that's called their Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test, ASVAB. It's very important. Like literally everybody in the military has to take it, and it's this assessment of where you are in reading, writing, arithmetic, and some other things like mechanical comprehension and all kinds of stuff. So when you take this test, it helps the military understand. It helps you understand, hey, well, what might I want to do while I'm here? So what I knew was that, so there's a couple of different, but I didn't know this at the time. So there's an overall score that combines all of these scores, and then there's individual scores for each one of the sections. What I knew what I thought was the SEALs, to qualify for SEALs, you needed to score like a certain level for the overall test. That's all I knew. And so I took a practice test because I did terribly in school, so I was panicking on how well I was going to do on this thing. And the guy's like, dude, you're going to be fine. You're good. So I'm like, okay. So then after the practice test, I ended up taking the real thing. I scored really well. And so I'm like, cool, I'm on my way. So I go to boot camp in San Diego, which doesn't exist anymore. But about halfway through boot camp, they're like, hey, raise your hand if you want to be a SEAL. And it was like me and one other guy. And we ran to this place away from the company that was where they were actually giving a screening test. And I knew what the screening test was. It was the push-ups, the sit-ups, pull-ups, running and swimming. And I knew all this before I joined the Navy. And as we show up, the guy with the clipboard is saying, like, who's Ugalde? And I was like, uh-oh, this isn't good. I'm like, I think you're probably talking about me. And he's like, yeah, you can't be here. I'm like, why? He's like, well, you need a 48. You need to score a 48 on the mechanical comprehension on the ASVAB. And you needed to score to 50. You scored a 48. And I was like, what does that have to do with anything? And he's like, you can't screen. And I was 18 years old. I didn't know any better. It was like the end of my life. I mean, he saw that I was completely like broken. I was just waiting for him to turn his back so I could start crying, kind of thing. And he was like, dude, if you want to do this, you just come back. All you got to do is, after boot camp, I see that you're slated to go to hospital corpsman school, which is perfect. But when you're done with that, go to your next command, and in 2 years you can retake the ASVAB and you can do it again. That's if you really want to do this. I couldn't really hear it. It sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher at the same time. I was understanding. It was weird. But anyway, so that's what I did. I went to Corps school. I was training the whole time, and then I went to my first duty station, Oakland Naval Hospital, which doesn't exist anymore also. And I told everybody, hey, I'm only here, like, this is bullshit. I'm not supposed to be here, kind of thing,
I'm supposed to be a SEAL.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be a SEAL by now, but this is just a pit stop for me, kind of thing, which is something that everyone wants to hear when they're getting a new hire. But I made it known. I was like, I'm here for just a pit stop. I'm going to buds and all that. And so the time that I needed to wait came up. I took ASVAB for Dummies, and it was ridiculous. Just, I'm telling you, half a day. If I would have done that before I took the ASVAB the first time, I would have been fine. But dang. I retook the ASVAB. I completely smashed it, and then I finally got a chance to actually take the screening test where it counted, and I failed the screening test. I failed the run. I'm like, damn it, you got to be kidding me.
What was the run qualifier?
I think it was 11 and a half minutes in boots and pants, and that was after the swim, push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups.
Like 2 miles or something? Or
I don't know, a mile and a half.
Okay.
So none of these things, by the way, are like lightning speed, like you can do this kind of thing. But I was never really a fast runner. So I failed the run, and I think I failed like the next 4 screening tests. And then I finally.
How long do you have to wait between those?
I don't know, but it ended up being months, And so I finally passed, and I was like, cool, I'm on my way. And then I ended up getting orders to buds after I screened positive. I showed up at a very interesting time. And they said, there's a class that's classing up on Monday. And you have the opportunity, you have the choice to class up with them, in like 4 days, or we recommend you hang out and go through like pre-training and get ramped up, ready to go for the next class that's going to be starting. And I was like, okay, that's what I'll do. So Monday started. So all the 300 guys that were there for SEAL training, they went on to first phase. And so it was just like me and one other guy were just sitting in what we called the pit at the time. Maybe it's the same thing now, I don't know. But we were kind of on our own program for a little bit, and then more guys started piling in. Now we got like 12 guys there, and like, okay, now we're going to start doing workouts. But they were kind of on our own. And then finally was the first day of pre-training workouts of like where the BUDS instructors were there, and we had some guys there, and I remember the first thing that we did was we did berm sprints. There's like back at the compound, there's like these 15-foot tall soft sand berms between the compound itself and the ocean. And we're running up and down. I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm here. And I was hanging in there. I was doing well. And so I'm like, yeah, this is super cool. And then at the end, and when we were done doing berm sprints, I'm like, all right, sweet. And then all of a sudden we took off on a conditioning run in the soft sand. And in an instant, I was like 300 feet behind everybody. And they follow behind the class in like these trucks they got the intercom speaker, and it's like, what are you doing back here already? I was like, I put out too much on the berm sprints. Yeah, just like the word, it's an excuse, it was perfect.
Just what they want to hear.
I'm sure that went
exactly
over great.
God, this is a good dude right here. No. They're like, this guy needs to leave. But anyway, for 4 months, that's kind of like what my existence was. I just was not running fast enough. I was doing well on underwater, not tying in the breath hold and some of the other like ill courses and all that stuff. But it was just, I failed literally every time run we had. I failed it, and also every conditioning run we had. I was in the goon squad, and the goon squad is just not a good place to be. But it's when you don't make the cut for fast enough.
That sounds like a bad squad.
Yeah.
It's not.
You don't want to be in the goon
not the
squad.
cool kids club by any means. But talking about identity, it ended up becoming my identity because I was in every single goon squad in the class. And as the days, weeks, and months were going by, like people were quitting in droves. And so it was almost like I had like this, dirty, stained, wrinkled, ugly cape on, but I was the goon squad.
You're wearing it proudly.
You were ahead of the goons.
Yeah, and it was something, this just goes to my maturity level at the time, and I was just not ready to be a SEAL at all in any way, shape, or form. But it became something that I was proud of. But all the while this was happening, my legs were slowly starting to break, and because they just were not conditioned to handle that kind of punishment on the sand for those distances, and that just was taking like 2,400 milligrams of Motrin every day and all this stuff. It was just not a good thing. So Friday before Hell Week, I'm in the mindset of here it comes, like everything I've been waiting for like this whole time, just completely oblivious to the fact that my body was breaking, completely oblivious to the fact that I was not, for all kinds of reasons, not prepared to be there. It just wasn't in my mind that I'm going to be good. And I got a tap on my shoulder on Thursday night at dinner, and they're like, hey, there's these things called Hell Week boards, and if you fail anything, you got to go in front of the instructors and they decide whether or not you're going to stay in training or not. And I was like, oh, like my heart kind of sank. And he's like, but I swear to God, you're good, because there's just no way they're going to drop you, because I'd been through so much. In the beginning of the class, like everybody hated me because what the hell is this guy doing here? And then slowly but surely I started winning over the students who were just like, dude, this is a hard motherfucker, man. Because I was just getting it. Because there were times where the instructors would literally push the whole class aside and stand in a circle around me to try to get me to quit for an extended period of time. And I remember looking over at the students, and while we're all supposed to be doing flutter kicks, they're all like, they're not even doing the exercise because the instructors aren't even looking at anybody else. So I started, So anyway, I started to get favor amongst the students of like, dude, he's taking the focus off us, man. He seems like he's a good guy. Yeah, like, let's do it. And then there was even a time where some of the buzz instructors were pulling me aside, like, dude, just keep going. Like, you're doing it. Just keep going. And so all of a sudden, my motivation, I didn't think anything could stop me. That was where the mindset that I had.
Is that a jovial, friendly, fun guy coming out?
Maybe. But not always, because it wasn't like I was failing these runs with a smile on my face. I was failing these runs defeated. Not mentally strong, not mentally resilient. There was a profound weakness there. It wasn't just that I wasn't finishing the running fast enough.
How do you keep going if you're that defeated?
Who knows? You know, who
is that just stupidity or like literally what it is, where you just keep showing back up?
There's a very common saying. In buzz, like, too stupid to quit, and for sure, like, I was in that file cabinet.
We talk about business owners the same way. You're either dumb or naive. There's one of the two. Which are you?
Yeah,
we were clearly the dumb guys.
Yeah, I was too stupid to quit for so many reasons. Like I said, like, my bones were breaking. My body was like, "Yo, what are we doing?" I was not in the mindset to be going out as an operator doing these highly surgical, classified, special operations missions. I was just nowhere near there. A smart person would have been, listen, dude, I gave it a good shot, but I don't belong here. That's what a smart person would have done. I did not do that. I just put my head down and kept going. So,
this is like a movie. I'm like, so what happens in the boards? They got us all in suspense.
So we're at Hell Week now.
Not yet.
No, not yet. He's in the boards,
yeah,
right?
So they called me up, and I showed up, and everybody's like, I wasn't the first one to go. There were guys who were going. You went individually, and there were guys. Some guys were coming back jacked, and some guys were coming back crying. They had done everything I had done, and were asked to leave. So I show up in the office, and as soon as I walk in, they're like, "Hey, appreciate your time, but you don't belong here." That was it, and I was just like, "Yeah, but all of this."
Is that a test?
No, this isn't. This isn't like Hell's Kitchen, kind of like, how bad do you really want to be here? Like, show me you want to be. Show me you want this bad enough.
It wasn't literally over.
It's like appreciate it, and I couldn't. It was almost like just the imbalance and the cloudiness of being a kid and being happy and jovial, but also being sad at the same time. I was so shocked that they dropped me, but at the same time, it's like, what else were they going to do? And I knew, you know what I mean? It was weird. I felt both. I was holding space for both of those emotions simultaneously. Wow. But when they dropped me, that was it. I went home. I went to medical, and they're like, dude, if you would have ran till Wednesday, your legs would have broken all the way. You wouldn't be able to walk normal for the rest of your life. Like, thank God you got dropped. And I couldn't hear it. I was just like, you don't even understand, dude. And the guy's like, well, I'm a SEAL. I understand. Okay.
You're like, all right, maybe you do.
I kind of know.
So, I kind of know. So, it's the military. So I had this contract that I had to continue to fulfill. So I was a corpsman, so I ended up becoming a corpsman with the Marines. It's how it's always been since the Marines have existed. They get their medics from the Navy, and it's very time-honored. I was very lucky to be part of that whole thing. Just amazing. So I deployed with the Marines, did a couple of rotations with those boys, and then my time in the military came to an end. I was like, I joined to be a SEAL. I'm not a SEAL, so I got out of the military entirely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I don't think I've heard a story like this one.
No.
Yeah.
So then what'd you do?
So then I went to bartender school.
Okay.
And
of course, that's where you go.
Yeah, I think so. I was what, 23 or something, whatever the math is. I never actually did go back to school to do well at math, so I still don't know how to add. But anyway, I was like 23 or something. Became a bartender, and that was super great. I ended up moving to Boston. I was a bartender there, then I started going to paramedic school, and then also became a singer in a rock band, which was awesome. Being part of that scene was super great. And I just started working out on the trucks. And then from there, I moved to Florida to work as a paramedic. And I was working nights, and I woke up 1 o'clock in the afternoon one day, and I turned on the TV at the foot of my bed, and I could barely see it past my stomach. And the first thing that came on the Discovery Channel was pararescueman in-doc training. So they were doing like a documentary on how somebody becomes a pararescueman, and what pararescue guys are. They're like the best paramedics in the military. And this is the first time I'm ever hearing about them. I'm like looking at this.
I saw that one.
It's amazing.
It's a crazy intense training too.
100%. They got a 90% attrition rate.
Wow.
It's
So it sounds like TV is really motivating for you.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I watch the same movies over and over again. Never gets old. Yep. So I that whole time, from the time I got dropped until that day, I averaged about 3 really crappy dreams about not making it through SEAL training a month. Like, it just kept going over and over and over again. And so that day when I woke up and I saw this thing, I was like, the only way these dreams are going to stop is if I go back. So I ended up losing 70. I moved to Hawaii to work as a paramedic. I ended up losing 70 pounds, but I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to be a PJ or a SEAL. And I went through this whole process, and I figured the only way I was actually going to get this monkey off, because there's nothing in the United States that's like buds. So that was the only way I was going to be free of this thing. I would have probably enjoyed being a pararescueman more, but that wouldn't have done anything to what I was ultimately trying to do. So I ended up going back at 29 and made it all the way through. I still had some difficulties, but the cool thing was, some of the guys that I was in buds with the first time were now my buds instructors the second time, and that was awesome.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
They remembered you?
100. You couldn't, dude. I was such a like. What do you call? I don't know. I was like, I had to, people had to know me, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Yeah, just there was no way you weren't gonna know me, weren't gonna not know me. My first time buds, there was a production in everything. Even the way I felt the runs was like dramatic, So, but this was cool because you get in trouble for all kinds of stuff in buds that are literally meaningless. But in buds, it's like these huge infractions. And one time I owed 100 push-ups, but I didn't have time to do it because we had to run to the next evolution. And so they're like, I had to pay him back or whatever it is. And then one day I had some time, so I ran up to one of the instructors. I was like, hey, I owe you 100 push-ups. And he looked at me square in the face, and he's like, you already did them. And he was my roommate the first time I was in buds. So he saw my legs all jacked up. He saw everything that I went through. He saw guys who could run 10 times faster than me quit. Like, he saw all that stuff. And so I was like, hey, I owe you 100 push-ups. And he goes, you don't know me shit, dude. We'll see it. And I was like, so that was super cool. That was kind of a perk, I would say, of going back the second time. And he could tell that I was in a very different place mentally and physically and in every way going back. So, yeah, it was good.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Well, let's transition here, because after first title on our sheet here, retired Navy SEAL, the next one is psychedelic pathfinder. Mm-hmm. I understand what the word psychedelic means, and I think I understand what the word pathfinder means. Mm-hmm. But in combination, I've never seen those two words.
Oh, yeah.
So what does that mean?
When I retired from the SEAL teams, we started a leadership development company. And we were in operations for about a year. And one day, one of my pathfinders came to me and he said, I'm not coming into work next week. There's an organization that takes SEALs down to Mexico and treats their traumatic brain injury, chemical addictions, post-traumatic stress, all of that stuff with psychedelics. And I just couldn't, I'd never heard, this is the first time in my life hearing psychedelics used in the context of mental health.
You're talking about shrooms?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like shrooms, acid, all of that. I'd never heard that used in anything other than like music festivals or Disneyland kind of thing. And so, but I knew that he was struggling hard. So I'm like, bro, do what you got to do. Can't wait to see you when you get back. So he left and he came back the next week, and he had a glow in his eyes, a vibrancy to his smile that I had never seen before. I mean, even his skin color was different.
Wow.
And I was like, bro, what the fuck happened? He's like, no words, man. It's just life-changing. I got to introduce you to these people. So he introduced me to them. They were looking for a CEO at the time. And I was like, well, I'd love to help you, but like, I don't do drugs, you know? So, but they're like, why don't you come down and just see what's going on? I'm like, I'd love to. And I went down there, and I literally watched them saving dudes' lives right out from under my nose. I saw it happen. And they're like, hey, we have an extra dose if you want to do it. I'm like, I'm good. Like, I don't have any PTS or whatever. But at the same time, I'm not in the military anymore. I'm not going to get any urinalysis tests or whatever.
Were you lying when you said that, or was that the truth?
No, it's true. Like, I was like, true from my perspective. Like, I'm good. I genuinely thought that. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I did it. And in an instant, I saw that I'm not where I thought I was in terms of being good.
How'd that show itself to you?
Just little tiny, like single cell frames of like a movie thing. But filled with all the. Imagine, like, for example, like the Shawshank Redemption, and just seeing Andrew Dufresne at the end in the mud, you know, in the rain, having just escaped, and seeing that image, instantly knowing what the entire movie was about. That's what this was. It just showed a picture of my dad. Nothing good, bad, or anything, just a little picture of my dad, and it was like, boom, here's like all this baggage that I am holding on. Yeah. Before that. And baby stuff, you know, and it's like, whoa, like I'm holding on to this, I'm holding on to that. And then it just, I didn't have to do anything because I didn't know any better at the time. So I just allowed the medicine to do what it does. And it just showed me what existence is once you let go, letting go and actually healing. And it was so powerful. It was so profound. It was so everything. I just had no idea how much weight I was carrying. Not a clue. And also, it showed me in an instant that everything that I've been taught about who I am, where I am, the world around me, all of it was wrong. And here's truth. And whoa, that shift, instantaneous shift in perspective was crazy. So and then go ahead.
No, go ahead.
One of the harder things that I have, we spend a lot of time doing it, but people say, dude, you realize you're on drugs, right? And it's like, there's no way to explain. All I can say is I've never known truth until I've seen it through the eyes of psychedelic medicine. All of this, of what I thought this is, if anything, this is all this is fake. Like, that is truth. So it's hard to explain to people who don't have that visceral connection, that visceral experience on their
Matrix
own.
moment.
Yeah, a lot of people that are listening probably that have never, done this, are thinking, well, why would I want to go and see? You know, people have a lot of fear about going to see baggage or going to see past trauma.
You have to deal with it.
Or going to, like, what do you say to them, with
not a word,
with that fear?
Not one word, unless they wake up one day and they're not as happy as they know that they could be, or they're not as successful as they know they could be, or they're not as strong as they know that they could be, and they don't know why. Only that would be the time that I would say something. But to somebody who's like, why the hell would I want to look at that? I have no idea, and you don't have to.
He's talking about, I think your answer is not quite on where he's going. Maybe, like, I took it as some people are comfortable addressing their fears like looking at it in the mirror and dealing with it. And there are a lot of people who are not comfortable addressing their fears because of the emotion and turmoil it's going to bring up.
Yep.
So if somebody's sitting there and they know they have it,
They know they want to be happier.
but they're scared to look themselves in the eye and deal with it, like, what do you say to that person?
Only through the fears is where that ultimately not only disappears, but you transcend it. It becomes a strength and a power for you.
Yeah, that's the answer.
That is the only way. No matter what, no matter how big the fear, no matter what,
Or small, right? Either way.
Well, anything you look at that's small. For example, I had this this memory of I think I was like in 7th or 8th grade or something, and I was with my best friend at the time and his dad, and we were going to go surfing up in Santa Cruz. And it was quite a ways away from Fairfield, so we packed lunches. And I was in charge of making sandwiches. And I go to my buddy's dad, and I was like, "Hey, what do you want in your sandwich?" He's like, "Just mustard, nothing else." And I'm like, "Okay." So I made him a mustard sandwich, and we go eat, and we're like an hour and a half.
No meat or just bread and mustard.
So we're an hour and a half into the drive.
Oh, this is a story.
And we're like, "Hey, you guys hungry?" Like, "Yeah, all right, let's bring out." And he pulls out. He bites into his sandwich. He's like, "Hey, did you put anything else other than mustard in there?" And I was like, and in an instant, I knew. I was like, "You dumb ass!" And I was just like mortified. I was like, "Oh my god!"
You're like, here's my sandwich.
And he's like, "No, I'm good." And I just saw it because could see him through the rearview mirror as he was driving. I was in the back of the van. I could just, and every bite he took, it was just like deeper and deeper shit. Like, "You idiot! What are you doing?" Anyway, that memory. We were talking about small things.
Yeah.
That memory completely jacked with me all the way up into my 40s. And I'm like, wait, okay, what's going on here? Who cares?
Yeah.
I was just,
would you feel like not smart?
And then it goes all the way to the, like peeling all the way. It's even beyond not smart. It's that I don't deserve even to be alive. When you go beyond the smart thing, go beyond this, when your value kind of thing. Knowledge is power. I have no knowledge. I have no power. I have no value in the tribe.
And that thread ran deep.
It did, and these are the things that psychedelics help, is like show you what these threads actually. It's not a mustard sandwich at all. You don't think that you deserve to be alive.
So that's like the self-loathing or not loving yourself.
All of that stuff, and then so you heal that. Even though it's a small thing, because there are no small things. Those are just the tips of the iceberg that only through the fear will you actually get to understand, like, oh, that has nothing to do with the sandwich. I don't even think that I deserve to be here as a human being. Like, I'm less than less. I'm below scum, all that. Yeah.
So how have you, transitioned that first experience to now actually using that as a practice for yourself and for others?
Every single time that I'm aware that I'm afraid, every single time that I'm aware, I'm talking about when I'm at my best here. There are times where I'm afraid where I don't, we have a discussion. I'll have to tabletop this for later and figure out what that is for. What is this? And this is very hard, I think. It seems to be a very difficult people to wrap their heads around, but we're three-dimensional creatures. We say length, width, height, and all that. That's what our brains are capable of processing. But as far as science can tell, there's 11 different dimensions that are going on around us all at once, all the same. And they're not other places. They're right here. We just can't see them. The best way that I know to explain this is there are some scientists who believe that there are butterflies that can't see their wings. They just the positioning of their head and the way their wings are shaped. Like, for example, like my favorite butterfly, it's in Peru. It's called the blue morpho. It's just like this laser blue, freaking awesome. It's almost like this cup almost. And it has no idea how beautiful it is. Not a clue. And all the rest of the world can see it. That would be an example of a dimension that we can't perceive, even though it's just right here. So what I'm trying to say is the human mind is incapable of healing or understanding these things that are multidimensional problems that we are still encountering. The problem is, what kind of going back to this whole thing about not deserving to be alive, almost all of us are taught that knowledge is power, which means that you're weak if you don't know, which means that you don't have any value in the tribe if you don't know. So you better know, because if you don't, what good are you? So the mind and the ego are like, oh yeah, no, we matter, and not only that, but we're leaders, we're thought leaders in this space, we're the ones who teach, kind of thing. So we create all these narratives, but only based off of the potential imagination of what the mind is capable of, which is not at all, number one, what is, and number two, it's not at all what's possible. It's even bigger than that.
Does that tie to identity? You know, when you talk about the blue butterfly, being able to see how pretty it is, and that we have to think that we're smart and how our ego is fulfilled, we're really coming back to what's our own identity of ourself, our ego, and all of that.
Totally.
And that's where we see, and I think it's natural. Most people struggle is in those transitions where, you know, your perception of other people's perception of your identity changes, and it creates a stress around them.
It doesn't even matter if it changes or not. There is stress that comes with identity because it's a confinement ultimately. I'm the nation's leading whatever. It's still confining because there's so much. We are all more. We're more than that. This is what gets hard when we started to talk about these psychedelic experiences where I was talking about, this is when I finally saw truth. One of the truths that I saw is that we are everything, that we are connected to everything. Being a SEAL is about as significant as a single blade of grass in a football field. It's just one little thing. But I'm also a dad. I'm also loving. I was a paper boy, like all these things. And I'm this, and I'm this, and I'm this. It's like the moment you start to, you know, fill out your resume is the moment you start to deny yourself everything that is, that's not on that paper. And then how many times of what's on that paper, and I'm not trying to talk about people who lie on their resume, but how many times on that paper is it in full alignment with truth? Like what is actually true, not what we perceive, but what is. It's not always there. So when people have this identity, it's almost always skewed by bias, prejudice, perspective, misinformation, not having all this stuff. So they're living like this illusion of like, this is how I'm supposed to present myself, which in and of itself is suffering. Just not allowing yourself to just be as you are.
It's crazy because when the last Honor Foundation cohort came here, you know, our role is on that day where they visit, and I'm sure you went through it, or did you go through the Honor Foundation?
Mm-hmm.
So when you go through that, you know, you have that day where you visit a bunch of different companies, you get exposed to industry, stuff like that. Instead of talking about insurance, we did a little bit, but we more talked about what you just talked about, that you're more dimensional than just whatever special warfare position you were in, you know, and that in order for you to have success in the next phase of your life, you really have to come to understand your full story. That's much bigger than whatever you just served in this last piece, and understand that narrative and how to use it and qualify the next people that, you know, you're going to interact with in your life.
The thing is, the people that I actually know, that I actually have relationships, who actually know the full story of who they are, is small. You can say that. You can say, hey, you need to know the full, but unless you have direct visceral experience with all that you are, there's no way to know. It's that dimensional perspective thing.
Yeah.
It's like,
do you ever really know?
Is this going back to the Matrix?
Yeah.
Well, there are some things that can be known.
Okay.
I know the alphabet.
I know the English alphabet for sure. I know that. There are things that can be known. But but most of what we think we know, as far as I'm aware, it cannot be known. It can't be. It can be perceived, but again, it's like there are things that you can know, but it can't be done with the mind. And this is another thing that is really throws people for a loop. It's like this type of knowing can only come from beyond the mind. So if you've never been in a space where you are fully in consciousness, you can't know. You can know who you are, but you have to be in that place in order to experience it, in order to know. You can always go to this place, well, we can't know anything because all of this stuff could be the Matrix. We could all be, there's always that. Like, no, you can't know anything. Well, what I mean by knowing, when I'm talking about it in the context that I do, is that there is no conflict. It just is. If I say, how do you know what I mean? There can always be some gray area that can be explained, this or that, whatever. Those are things that I cannot necessarily be known. Like I can't ever tell you what you mean, because what do I know?
Right.
Even though you tell me all the words. So this is like a different level of knowing. Yes, there is a level where it's possible we don't know anything. There's another level where there is the ability to know, but it is without resistance. But that can only happen when you're fully released. Allow the process to be as it is.
You're talking about like releasing your ego to where you can really see it transparently.
You can't release your ego, as far as I know. It's more about occupying a different space altogether than your ego occupies.
So is that how you're, helping people that are in a place of suffering, whether it's somebody in the military that has PTSD, or from a childhood trauma, or other traumas that they've experienced? Is that the work that you're doing now?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, and then how you? Because I think you also work with a nonprofit that helps facilitate these experiences.
Yeah, the Heroic Hearts Project.
Yeah,
for sure.
Can you talk a little bit about that, and so that the listeners can kind of hear, how you what your involvement in that is, also how you're helping people that are experiencing these suffering.
Yeah, one of the more common comments that I get when I'm coaching executives or athletes or even mental health clinicians is, listen, I haven't been through what you've been through, but like, here's my baggage. And what I found over time with what's at the root of what they're going through is literally the exact same thing as what was at the root of what every veteran is suffering from. As far as I can tell, there are two fundamental components. One is being disconnected from the self, this piece that I was talking about before, about beyond the thinking mind. And then number two is not understanding the mind. So there are people who believe that because they think that is their best effort, and that's most likely the case. And nothing could be further from the truth most of the time. So when we help people connect to the space that's beyond, when we help them understand the mind for what it is, and more importantly, for what it is not, there is no more suffering. In the mental, there's two forms of suffering: physical suffering, you stub your toe, or whatever, or you break your arm, whatever it is, that's physical suffering. But all the rest of the suffering is mental suffering. There is no mental suffering when you connect with who you are. There is no mental suffering when you have a deep understanding of what the mind is and what it isn't. We're human, so I can know these things, but also waver because I have a lot of growing and developing to do. But when I recenter myself in the space of, well, wait a minute, I'm suffering, what is going on here? And we were talking before about facing the fear, like going through the fear and recentering myself, connecting deeply and understanding that this whole narrative thing is just literally meaningless, then the suffering goes away. And I've gone through some of the most intense suffering that I've experienced outside of the medicine earlier in this year. And what would have caused me years of pain and suffering lasted days.
and then it's back to center again. So those are the two fundamental components. Now I can tell, like, these, what I'm saying right now is just words. It's literally meaningless if you don't know what it is to connect to the space. It's just, well, whatever. Even if you believe me, let's just assume that I'm being believed. It's still just words until
you feel it.
Yes.
You actually have to feel it in your body.
Well, can we separate it into two spaces of how people can access it? Because there's one that you just referenced, which is professional athletes and executives and things like that. Obviously, there's going to be financial resource for them to tap into it. What about the average, not average, but what about your military veteran that may not have the same resources those people do? How can that person who may be suffering access this world?
So it all comes down to you have to get yourself to a state of elevated consciousness in order for this to be. In other words, you have to bring yourself from the three-dimensional awareness to something bigger than that. And there's many ways to do that. One of the ways is meditation with a deep practice over a long period of time. You can reach these states. Holotropic breathing is another way where you breathe a certain way for like 30, 40 minutes and you're gone. You are not in your body anymore. And
It's like what Bluestein does.
Yeah. And the first one is like Joe Dispenza meditation, right? Like his practice.
There are many. I'm sure that
one of
that's
the-
one
one of
of
the
his.
examples.
Yeah, for sure. The psychedelics are another one. Sweat lodges, vision quests, all of those types of things. Some say sensory deprivation tanks, but it's not in my experience. I've done a bunch of sensory deprivation tanks. I haven't experienced that, but some people say they've had more powerful experience in a sensory deprivation tank than they did in psychedelics, which is amazing.
But can I ask it a different way? Let's say there's somebody that doesn't have the money to pay to go get psychedelics
it's free to
or
meditate.
shaman or something, but
It's free to meditate.
if they want to take it to the next level beyond that, that's a financial investment. Not necessarily you or your organization, but just in general.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to do it responsibly, right? So growing mushrooms is not all that expensive. But to do mushrooms on your own with this capacity without any support or coaching or whatever is reckless.
Yeah.
And so it's going to cost some money unless you're friends with somebody who does this and they're cool with doing this stuff for free. But this is a big, giant investment. There has to be preparation work that's involved. You have to learn and eat right and do all the things right. And then you go through the ceremony, which can be an entire day long, even though it's like you're in the medicine for 4 or 5 hours. There's a whole day of this. And then you have to go through integration, which can be, 3 to 50 hours or even more of trying
50 hours.
trying to understand what this stuff is.
Can you talk a little bit about the integration piece? Because
Yeah, it's
it
about
sounds
as-
like that's where
It's almost
the
as-
awareness happens, because you're in the medicine, right? And then you go through this integration, and then how do you bring that back into your life or continue to integrate that?
Yeah, so the story that I use is, so Leif Erikson left Norway about 500 years before Columbus, and he found himself in Newfoundland, Canada. And imagine the first night of his trip, psychedelics comes over and picks up Leif, and in an instant whisks him over to Canada and sets him down and says, "Leif, this is Canada. Here you see the hills and the people and the deer trails and all that. All right, and here, bend down, grab the dirt, put the dirt in your hand, get it. This is Canada. Okay, cool." And it picks him back up. In an instant, he puts him right back on the ship. That's what psychedelics does. He still has to navigate his crew. He still has to figure out what's going on with the tides and the weather. He still has to maintain his equipment, but this time he knows where he's going. And that is the integration process of like, I know what this looks like, but now I'm back here. And now I'm making the small life changes or sometimes the big life changes that I need to make in order to get my ship from here to here. So you can get incredibly powerful insights from the medicine. You can get huge amounts of like physical healing from the medicine. You can get all this stuff, but then you have to, what it does is it makes your life easy, some would say, for most, for like a month or 3 months after you do the medicine. And what it does is it has created space for you to create new habits that are actually healthy for you. And these habits are part of the integration process. Like, well, let's say I always down talk myself, and that thing was just like this huge movie screen all night long in the medicine, or just like how crappily I talk to myself. Okay, cool. Now in the integration process, it's like, oh, I noticed I just said something bad about myself. Let's reframe it and put it into different words so that I'm not lying to myself, but I'm also being, I'm invigorating, I'm enabling myself to be more powerful, that kind of thing. So integration can help you see that and help you build, because it's different for everybody, the habits that you need to build, so that when the medicine fades away, like on a surface level, and you no longer have those training wheels or the crutches, you've built the habits that are necessary in order to get you closer to candidate, kind of thing.
So it sounds like the medicine gives you the awareness and the experience and the feelings, and then then the work comes after with, you know, integrating it into your life and practicing it.
100%.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
100%. There are people who are so far out of gas when they show up to the medicine, they kind of need the medicine to do everything. And I get it. You know, who could blame them? But it doesn't work that way. You have to do work. There's so much of an active participant part in this, because you can do the medicine, you can have all of these incredible realizations and insights in that, but if you don't make any real changes, you will be exactly where you were a year from now. And some people even go, man, I'm even worse now than I was when I did the medicine to begin with. Most of all of that is because you can't be exposed to something like that and not do what needs to be done to get back up to there without suffering. Because you know it's there. You know that piece is there. And you know what you need to do to get there. And if you're not doing it, that in and of itself is suffering. So it just depends on how much suffering people are prepared to tolerate, is really what it kind of comes down to.
What do you see with psychedelics? In California, at least, it kind of feels similar to the path that marijuana took, to where it's slowly making progress and become medically used. Do you think it'll achieve that same place as marijuana and alcohol and other things do in our society, or where do you see it going?
I see it surpassing marijuana.
In use, or in what way?
In in use and in validation and all these things. Because, for example, there are all kinds of psychedelics that are being considered as the treatment modality for mental health issues, which there are some things where cannabis is like that, but it's not. Cannabis is kind of like an adjunct. Psychedelics are being used as the way. There are studies. They've been doing studies on psychedelics since
the last time we had this conversation, it shows up in my Instagram and Facebook advertising. You know, it's like you can get a prescription for it right now.
Yeah.
Well, they're using ketamine now in the medical facilities.
Yeah,
Psychedelic.
for sure. And you know, I'm grateful for it, but at the same time, I'm coaching a lot of people who are going through these ketamine clinics, and they're not, for the most part, based off of my experience, these ketamine clinics are not being run responsibly. We were talking about integration. The ketamine, most of the ketamine, I'm not all the clinics, I don't know all the ketamine clinics, but most of the ketamine clinics are not offering integration. They're like, hey, roll up, we'll jam you full of ketamine, we'll send you on your way, a couple of treatments, you're good to go. That is not how psychedelics work at all. In fact, it's reckless. In fact, don't do that. So I'm always grateful when I run into somebody who's, man, I've been doing ketamine and like everything seemed cool, but now everything's not cool. It's like, well, what are you doing for it? I'm not. Oh, cool. Well, let's get into this and to start helping you like the real way. And so the problem is, so for example, like Gavin Newsom turned down, I think, decriminalization of psychedelics last year, and he was like, listen, I know this stuff works, but we want to get it like approved for medical use, or
Yeah.
by certified clinicians, doctors and licensed clinicians, I should say. And it's like, man, I appreciate that, because that's like our general understanding of like the best way to do things, but that is not the best way to do things. There are very, very, very few doctors that I know who know anything about psychedelics. And just because somebody's gone through medical school doesn't mean they know anything about these whole existential levels of, they just don't. And there's a really famous saying by this famous psychotherapist, Dr. Stanislav Grof. He said, I learned more in 4 hours of psychedelic medicine use than I did in 20 years of psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. And that includes all the schooling that he went to. So you can read a book all you want about ego, but if you don't have a visceral interaction with your ego, you don't know what it is. You can read it, you can answer it on a test, but you don't know what it is.
It reminds me of the Good Will Hunting with Robin Williams and Matt. I think it was Ben Affleck. When he said you can, read books on all these different places.
Absolutely,
but you
can't tell me what it smells like in Sistine Chapel.
Yeah.
That's why we coach mental health clinicians, because they cannot legally prescribe. They can't even. There are a ton of mental health clinicians that know that the only way they're actually going to be able to help this person is if they do psychedelics, and they can't even tell them that because they'll lose their license. Like, that's crazy.
Do you think that's going to change?
I think it is going to change eventually.
I think it will too.
And I think
it's coming.
Yeah, but then when that does change, there are going to be licensed people who are licensed to give psychedelics, and there are going to be licensed people who know psychedelics, and it's going to be a very, very different thing.
Yeah.
In my experience with all the friends and all the people that I have in my life, between coaches and psychotherapists, I better not say this because
we'll edit this part out.
Okay. The top 5 people that I know that I would refer anybody that I know, love, and trust to are all coaches. None of them are psychologists, or none of them are, because they don't have this connection. They can't really, because what happens in psychotherapy is like, we talk, try to help you out, try to get you to understand things that maybe you're not necessarily getting. And at the end of the day, if it's not working out, dude, here, take this Wellbutrin, take this Zoloft, take this take all this stuff, and you get put on a shelf, and then they just adjust your life based off of, if they need to up or down those. That is the way. And that doesn't heal anybody. With psychedelics, you can actually heal. You can get to a place where you don't need these medicines anymore. Heroin addicts have a 68% cure rate if they go back to an environment that's not supporting their drug use. There is nothing in mental health right now that is talking anything about cure for anything at all. But you give them Ibogaine, they have 60% chance of never doing heroin again if you remove them from their old environment.
That's
Amazing.
huge. Yeah.
I feel like we need to have part 2 as this unfolds legally in our system and becomes more accessible to people. We need to have them come back and talk about it again. Why don't we transition to rapid fire? Me and Warren you. We're going to pepper you with a few questions.
Let's do it.
All right, let's go.
First word or thought that comes to mind, just kick it our way. It's more lighthearted and fun, so.
Okay,
right.
I'm going into a meditative state.
All right, what's your favorite way to celebrate?
Smile.
All right.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Not looking towards the self as the source of suffering.
What is the best gift you've ever given?
A hug.
What skill do you have today that you didn't a year ago?
I'm more patient.
That's a good one.
If you could swap lives with anyone for a week, who would it be?
Not a person.
What's at the very top of your bucket list that you haven't done yet?
New Zealand?
Ooh,
All
fun.
right.
All right, you can open your eyes. That was it. That was quick.
You did great, by the
Told
way.
you it was lighthearted.
And whoever said you weren't smart?
Oh, plenty.
Sounds
I'm
like
saying,
you
I'm
were
saying
saying-
yourself.
Starting with this one.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so looking forward, what's next for you in your life?
We've got a couple of keynotes coming up. We're speaking in Vegas at PsyCon. It's like Comic-Con, but for psychedelics.
Cool.
In May, and then speaking again in Alaska for a psychedelic conference out there. And I just got the news we're going to Iceland to talk over there in February.
Nice.
So
That's fun.
That's a super cool one.
That's on my bucket list there.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, it's my favorite country in the world that I've been
heard
to.
it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like a
Where are you
whole
going to
other
be in Alaska?
just Anchorage.
Okay. Nice.
So that'll be cool. We have our first psychedelics for leaders. We're taking to a group to Peru November 3rd through 8th. We have some slots available that are still available for that. It's one of the best ayahuasca treatment centers in the world that we have really strong relationships with. So we'll go down. It's like 7 days. We do 3 nights of medicine, and it's not only coming into connection with this deep self that I was talking about, also understanding the mind, but then when you're coming out of it, how does all this stuff not only translate to healing the self and developing the self, but how can it possibly translate to leading teams? So we're super excited about that. Yeah.
Dude, you got that's like the best answer of what's next that we've had. That's a good list of items.
Yeah.
Very cool.
If I sat down and was like, all right, cool, anything in the world, let's do it. Like I couldn't come up with anything better than I'm doing right now.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
Love to hear that.
It's like the best.
Well, this part is where we kind of ask you to reflect back on your life, and when you're actually thinking about your younger self, given the experience you've had, what kind of advice would you give your younger self?
Not a word, man. The jury's still out on how wise I've become or have not become. We're talking about knowing. I don't know enough to speak to that little boy. But what I can do is I can just sit there, just send him rays of love maybe. But maybe even that would be disruptive. I'm not sure. I think I know for sure I wouldn't say a word.
I love that. You're just really at peace that everything happens for a reason and you are who you are.
I don't
That's
even
how
know
you
if they happen
feel.
for a reason. They are just happening. It just is happening. And it's all good. It's all okay.
All right. Well, last question. It's called Discover the Difference, the podcast. You think about people who are able to overcome the kind of, like, say, trauma that you did in failing to qualify for Navy SEALs in a variety of ways over a long period of time and then achieving success. What is that thing about you that makes you special and different to do things like that? Is that a hard question for you to look at yourself like that in a positive light?
No, I can see. I've seen the light that I am. It's not hard for me to see both and hold both. I've seen the darkness in me too, and that's all good too. That's important too. But I think what makes me different is what makes everyone different. I had a buddy that I went through SEAL training with, who I went to SEAL Team 2, he went to SEAL Team 4. We had dog handlers in the teams, but we were to outsource it like through the National Guard or the Army or whatever. And just over time, we're like, man, we got to do this in-house in order for our operations to run more seamlessly. So they started the first Navy SEAL-based dog handler training program. And so they asked him to be this guy. And then, so he was working in the platoons for like 8 years, and then he got out of the Navy entirely, and he started his own dog handling company. And now he trains some of the best trained dogs in the world. His dogs go to the SAS, Dam Neck, all these places. In fact, he trained the dog that did the Bin Laden raid. And about 8 years ago or so, maybe 7 years ago, this company approached him and said, hey, we want to clone your best dog. And he's like, okay.
So they cloned it, and typically what happens is when a dog is from the time the dog is born to the time it's ready to jump out of planes, climb ladders, not bark when all the other dogs are barking, smell bombs and all that, it's about 2 years. With this clone dog, it took him 8 months to do the same exact thing. And so they call that cellular memory, which is, your ancestors have this contribution that gets passed down to us. Another story they did that was really cool is they did this thing where they put mice and they exposed them to cherry blossoms, and every time they showed them a cherry blossom, they gave them an electric shock. And then over time, they decreased the amount of the intensity of the shocks, but still they were getting shocked to the time where now they were just showing the blossom, and without any electricity at all, the mouse would have like a physical reaction. Fair enough, but what was interesting about that is the grandchildren of those mice who were never involved in the study whatsoever would also have these physical reactions when they saw cherry blossoms. So what makes me me are the hundreds and thousands or maybe even millions of people who conspired to. I'm just a budding flower at the end of a branch right now, and then when I die, and I have a daughter, and she's going to be that flower. She already is, but you know what I mean. It's just what makes me different is all the people who've conspired to make me and contribute to who I am. That's what makes everybody different. Everyone's special.
Unique, yeah. Love that.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of the book It Didn't Start With You?
No.
It talks about that.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
Well, so for listeners that want to connect with you, learn more, etc., how's the best way for them to engage?
The Trident Approach, all 3 words, thetridentapproach.com. And then I'm a lot on LinkedIn is probably where I do most of my social media stuff under Diego Ugalde. And then we're also on Instagram, and we're starting to beef up our YouTube a little bit with our podcast. Like you guys are going to be on our YouTube channel and all that.
Awesome. Who should engage you?
So, should is a big word for me. If anybody feels compelled, feels called to reach out, they're the right people. It doesn't matter. Is most of the people who align most with what we do are people who have achieved a lot of things and are looking in the mirror and just wondering what the fuck, this can't be it. I've done all this. Why is this not enough? Those people seem to be the ones that align the best with not only being in a place that's even ready to receive our level of training. We're not team builders. This is serious stuff. This is serious stuff about leadership. This is serious stuff about self-introspection. It's not a little thing to say, I'm pissed off. How am I contributing to the situation as it is? That's serious work. It's getting in. It's turning around and facing towards your deepest fears. I've never been afraid in my life like I've been afraid having to look at myself as I actually was. That doesn't sound like much, but being shot at and all that stuff, child's play compared to like, this is where I am right now. Genuinely speaking, not how I want the world to see me, not how I want to see me, but where I actually am. There has been nothing more terrifying than that, and that's what this work is. But having gone through that and having allowed myself to sit in that fear and transcend it, that is what's empowering. That's what catapults. That's what changes things. That's where now I can look in the mirror and not worry about, I don't ever say, you can't tell me that this is it. I don't feel like that anymore at all. Like, yes, all of this is it. And I'm so happy to be here.
That's awesome. So if you're listening and you want to reach out to him, then you're the right person to reach out to him. I like it. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Really, really good to have you on.
It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.